Hello folks, this is David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com, your pub chess bluffer, talking to you on Sunday, June the 15th, 2019, from my man cave here in Hiroshima, where I recently played an over-the-board game with one of my regular opponents, in which I was white and opened, as I usually do, with d4. And here is how the early moves panned out. d5, c4, and with this c6 move, we are in the Slav Defence, as it says up here, Slav Defence. And this is a strong defensive setup for black against white's d4 opening. John Watson says that it is one of the most effective d-pawn defences. And the reason for this, or one reason for this, apart from creating a nice strong pawn chain, is that it leaves this path open for black's light squared bishop. Very often when we have an e6 pawn move in the opening period of the game against the d opening, the light squared bishop is hemmed in, and for black it's always a question of how can I liberate or get my light squared bishop active. So the Slav defense overcomes that problem by this second move, c6. However, there are some accompanying drawbacks to take into consideration. One is that c6 is also considered the ideal square for the b8 knight to land on, its opening move. However, the knight can simply move to d7 and move on to some other square from there. A second slight drawback is that black very often, when playing against d4 opening, likes to launch a c5 pawn break to attack this d pawn. And that usually happens in one move, bang, like so. So usually the knight will develop, and then the knight will probably move on, and then you get this pawn break bash down there in one move. If you're playing a Slav defense style game, and you decide to launch a pawn break, it takes you 2 moves to do it. So there's a slight tempo. There's a slowdown in tempo if that's the way the game proceeds for you. But those are minor disadvantages compared to the major gain. The big asset you get with this setup is a strong pawn chain and an open road for your light squared bishop. So with that said, we continue to develop with fairly steady moves, nothing erratic in this opening. Here we see that this is still a very much a recommended move, or one of the recommended options for black in the Slav defense is this bishop to f5 move. So black's development is now pretty good. He's got a nice pawn chain. His pieces are looking at the center, challenging for the center. This bishop is now nicely developed. It can retreat back here if it needs to. And so, as you can see here, it's a pretty even game. I developed my knight. Now, this is not a recommended move by John Watson. One of the great benefits of making these videos is that I get to research and find out where I'm going wrong in my own games, and in that way I'm trying to improve my own play, as well as helping my opponent and anybody else who's watching these videos who's at an amateur kind of casual chess level, with some tips to improve your games too, I hope. So this move of mine, recommended by the Lichess engine, so it's not a bad move, but it's simply not one that John Watson favours in a strategic chess opening for white. Instead, he prefers this line here, where you take the d pawn with your c pawn, and we get this nice series of moves with this strong queen move by white, queen to b3. And you can see that the queen is looking very closely at this pawn, and at the same time putting some pressure on white's d pawn here. Sorry, on black's d pawn here. And so according to John Watson, this b7 pawn is very difficult for black to defend, and in fact you can see that the light chess engine is simply has simply decided not to bother defending that pawn at all, but rather build a pawn chain here now. Now that this bishop is developed, the e6 move can come in. The bishop is outside the pawn chain, and so we can see really another benefit of the Slav defense. Having lost the first pawn chain, you can rebuild your pawn chain in the center in this way. There is a question mark over this pawn, however. There are various other ways to respond to it, to White's threat, and one method that John Watson thinks is the best for black is actually to send the bishop back home. However, none of that happened in our game because after playing knight to f3, we had knight to b7, and as you can see, the engine is recommending that I take that d pawn. This is a big lesson for me, playing my favored white queen's pawn opening or d4 opening, is that I'm still not au fait with the best way to proceed in certain setups, including, as I now realize, the Slav defense, because this is what I did. I decided to strengthen this pawn here with this b3 move. Now, it's not a terrible move. You can see that the advantage has slipped away from me. We're still basically in equality, but I have lost that edge which white goes into the game with. Black is always seeking to gain equality. That's black's first priority, and black has achieved that here. However, in the Slav defense, it's better actually to knock out this leading pawn here. So that's one lesson that I have learned from how my game went, how I played, and what I should have done in this game. So anyway, I moved b3, and my opponent moves e6. I then developed my bishop. I'm getting ready to castle, and we have this bishop's move here, pinning the knight to the king. So I move my bishop, unpinning the knight. And yeah, this looks like a nice little move here, causing some aggravation to White's back line on the queen side. However, instead, we both castled, and Black retreated the bishop to what is still a nice diagonal. But things are beginning to tilt my way here, very slightly. It's still a very even game. Now, this move, I'm looking at Black's bishop on this long diagonal, and I thought what I'll do is put some pressure on the bishop. Now, this is not an ideal move, and I was aware at the time that taking the pressure off the center in this way actually is not ideal. And you can see it doesn't have a big effect, but it doesn't produce any major jump in my advantage. There's a simple way out. As you can see, the engine is simply recommending that Black retreat his bishop. But this is the pub chess bluffer level and style of play. And quite often at our level, something like this can induce a mistake. And that's what happened here. I was very surprised to see not a retreat of the bishop, but, and look at the advantage bar, a very aggressive and premature attack. Premature attacks are a feature of lower level chess, let us say. So my opponent, not sure what to do with his bishop. He decides to knock out this pawn to try, obviously, to try to weaken the defenses around the king, but the defenses are too strong. I can simply take the bishop with my knight. So the easy chess tip of this game is do not launch a premature attack. So you can see now what Black's idea was to weaken White on this diagonal so as to bring in pressure with the queen. But it's a flawed idea. It's premature. It would have been better if you want to do that. It would probably have been better to have let the bishop drop back, and then you can bring the queen over here, and then you at least have a barrage opening up on this pawn here. But even so, even if the bishop takes the pawn, the knight takes the bishop, the queen isn't going to take the knight and drop to the king. So although that would have been a better way to go, it's just a less bad way to develop. So we have this set of moves. And so, yes, to counter the queen, I'm probably being overly cautious here, and possibly even weakening my pawn structure. But this gives me this break into the center, and it also allows me to get my rook moving at some stage. So the queen is now shut out from threatening this corner at all. And so now I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking that I'm going to try and expand on the queen side. But you can see the engine is offering. I mean, I'm a bit worried about opening up space in front of my king, but in fact, I needn't be worried about that at all. This advance of this pawn is very strong, supported by the knight and the bishop and the queen. And this bishop here, the space is becoming restricted. So this is a nice, strong move. It just looks a bit frightening that the king is suddenly looking at a lot of open space. So I plodded along on the queen side here, and meanwhile, I think as I'm plodding along up here, there are chances for black to maintain, to start to putting pressure back on the king's side. That's what I was fearing, but it was an ungrounded fear on my part, I think. And so when black retreated his bishop back here, I felt that the pressure was totally off and I could just keep going. I completely miscalculate by this rather foolish move here. You can see that the advantage bar drops. I was thinking that I wanted to put pressure on, but I then did this move showing a lack of calculation, because I think I was expecting the queen to drop back, forgetting that all that needs to happen is that pawn takes pawn. And here, countering pawn takes pawn. The queen can simply take the pawn, so it's 2 for 1, and my queen will have to retreat or get taken by the rook. Even with knight taking pawn and attacking the queen, it's now 2 for 1. So black has gained a pawn on the queen side, though the material advantage is still with me, having picked up that bishop. So I drop back here, which is keeping an eye on this knight, keeping the queen committed to defending the knight. And so the knight, or simply move the knight away. Now here, black is attempting a pawn break, which the engine does not think is ideal. And I jumped up with my knight and grabbed that knight. I was kind of concerned about those minor pieces on the king's side. I was quite pleased with this move. I get my rook active, blocking the queen out again. The bishop blocks. And I was very pleased to find this move as well, where I'd simply get my bishop active, attacking that knight. The knight comes in. Now, here we have an interesting case. I think I found a better way to do what the engine is suggesting. The engine is suggesting that knight takes d5, and it looks like things are going crazy. The knight didn't take the knight took a pawn, and it looks as if the knight can be taken by either of these two pawns. But in fact, the point is, if you take the knight with this pawn, the queen will fall to the rook. If you take the knight with this pawn, the bishop will fall to the rook. So there's some real pressure on black here. What looks like a strong pawn chain is actually falsely so, because of the work that the pawns are doing, either covering or defending major and minor pieces. However, I didn't do that. I think I found something better. I took the knight with my knight. Black responded by retaking. It's all fine for me because as you can see, the material advantage and the total advantage is tipping my way all the time. We make these equal exchanges, and then I advance my pawn, finding I'm very pleased I found that move, realizing that these two pawns are committed in their defensive duties. This one is defending the bishop. This one is protecting the queen. Against that, Black's idea is to start attacking down here, doubling up those rooks and attacking down this G file. Now, I was aware that taking the center pawn out would generally speaking be better. The thing which prevented me from doing it was thinking if Black retakes with the F pawn, then the queen can come over here, and we might end up with an even stronger barrage coming down, putting pressure on this poor old G pawn. So I wasn't really sure how to cash in on that advantage that I gained. I can't simply, well, I can advance the pawn, it just gets taken. And I don't really have, in short, I decided I'll just keep cashing in. So that's what I did. And I cashed in on the queen side to at least make it at least cause Black to have to move one extra move to open up the line for the queen to come over. And also at the same time, moving the pawns over gives my pawn here a nice road towards the A8 square and promotion. However, I thought instead I'd put some pressure on this pawn. The pawn can't take the bishop unless Black wants to lose his queen. Black tries a similar trick with his bishop against my pawn down here. But the big benefit I have here with this bishop over here is that I can simply move up my pawn. The pawn gets instant support like so. Preparing to double rooks, forgetting, however, that I can simply now take that pawn. The queen comes forward. I put some pressure on that bishop. Now, this move here I am very pleased to have found because this rook on c2 becomes essential to my defense a bit later on. The king is a bit vulnerable, or was a bit vulnerable, to the queen coming in here if this queen moves away and checking the king. Also access to the back row through a1. So I thought discretion was the better part of valor here. Move my rook back down to a nice defensive position. Now, technically the queen can still come down here, but this square proved an invaluable move for me a bit later on. It's a kind of blunder protecting move, as you will see. The doubling up begins. This move, as you can see, it takes away my advantage. Why is that? It looks as if I'm splitting the queen and the rook. The problem is that it opens up access to the queen coming in to h5 and checking the king. However, my pieces are well enough placed for me to escape from trouble, at least from my own ability to calculate. But also the chess engine at the level I've set it doesn't find a way for Black to win. What did I do? I moved my king to g1, and then we have this move, but you can see the advantage comes back to me with this move because let's follow the Lichess recommended moves. You'll see how even following Lichess's recommended moves, attacking the rook, I bring my rook across to attack the queen. It's blocked. I take his rook. He takes my rook. I bring my bishop down. Still trying to cash in on my material advantage. There's an unprotected bishop here. And so we get this set of moves. And there goes the bishops. However, we can pull a draw out of the hat in this way. So although I completely lost my advantage by trying to split the queen, trying to fork the queen and the rook with that move, and my opponent saw that he could get in. Even with those ideal moves, he turns defeat for him into a draw, and I avoid turning a victory into a defeat. But the ideal moves were not played, and so I had a route out. I felt even with this kind of danger looming, I had time, and in fact it's quite necessary to take that rook with my bishop. So I'm getting something back for what I'm anticipating will be the loss of that bishop. But black comes straight in with a check, and I've got a route. I've got this nice wriggling snake black squared route away from the danger of bishop and queen. And I've also got my beautiful c2 rook ready to help me, or help the king escape. I was expecting the bishop to fall now, but black wants to keep piling on the checks. It's getting my king away to safety. Okay, I lose that pawn, but my king is one nearer safety. Black sees that and rushes in with another check, liberating my bishop. Now, in moving my bishop back, I think I've got my bishop to safety, and I have, but there is what looks like a set of moves bringing a benefit to black. However, note the advantage bar is still firmly in white's favour. So even had black played this ideal or optimum move, in which black gains the bishop and the rook for the rook, I still have this move, which maintains for me a one rook material advantage. So even the optimum move, when I brought my bishop back, does not achieve anything for black. But in fact, what happens is that black continues to attempt to check the king into submission, but it's not going to happen because the king has an escape route. Oh yes, and then finally, in fairness to my opponent, there was very little time left on the clock. There's just a minute or left on the clock, so he had to move quickly, and it's a very easy thing to happen. He didn't notice that my bishop was lurking on that diagonal, and so his queen fell. So that really was pretty much the end of the game. But as neither of us had much time on the clock, we played through to see if I could win within the time, or if I could win win on loss of time, or in fact end up losing on loss of time. So it was quite a fun and exciting ending. Clearly, black should have moved his queen to g1 to get that check in. But even with this check here, my king can't move to safety. There's nothing really that black can do about that. It may simply have it may simply have avoided a checkmate and seen black go down to a time loss. However, the ideal or the least bad move was not played. We had instead this blunder. I pick up the queen. It's now desperation time. And this is how the game ends, like so. So there we are, an eventful and enjoyable game. Not our opening, I think, was quite reasonable, but my mistake, or my mistake was not to take the d5 pawn with my c4 pawn, and my opponent's mistake was the all too early attack with his bishop, which led to a material disadvantage and no great benefit to black for that. Okay, so there's a lot to learn. We're both trying to improve our game, and I hope you enjoy these chess videos I'm making to help me and to offer some tips to anybody else who's interested. Okay, that's all from me, David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com, your pub chess bluffer, signing out after another eventful game here in Hiroshima.